Coming up, Secretary Jennifer Granholm leads the U.S. Department of Energy. She tells ICT about her vision for tribal energy sovereignty. Survivors of Canada's 60s scoop share their stories, and we have tips for protecting your identity during holiday shopping. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is a proud supporter of Indian Country Today. Students at Cronkite News and Gaylord College at the University of Oklahoma cover Indigenous communities together. This important work is distributed by more than 100 news organizations. This collaboration provides a much-needed boost to coverage of Native American communities nationwide. Learn more at cronkitenews.azpbs.org.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Amarawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. A virtual town hall last week spotlighted what's at stake for Indian country this election season. Social justice organization Illuminative held a Facebook Live event called Natives Vote. Illuminative President and CEO Crystal Echohawk and partner of Spirit Rock Consulting Holly Cook Macaro hosted the event. They spoke about the importance of the Native vote with tribal leaders and grassroots organizers. That included some of the barriers to voting.
Full well that across Indian country it is too difficult to cast a ballot, and that's intentional.
Various voter issues were discussed, such as transportation and lack of adequate mail delivery systems, as well as solutions and on-the-ground efforts to increase voter participation in the future. Actor and activist Benjamin Bratt spoke out.
We broke records in 2020. More Native voters than ever before came out to the polls to vote with our Indigenous values. And I'm asking you to join me. Let's get out there and do it again.
For those who missed the live stream, you can watch the virtual town hall by visiting Illuminative's Facebook page. Tattoos have historically been a practice used by many Indigenous people, and in today's day and age, that has evolved. ICT's Pacey Smith Garcia recently profiled a group of artists giving a modern-day spin on this practice. Take a look.
Midtown in Phoenix, Arizona plays host to Desert Bloom, which is an Indigenous-owned and operated tattoo shop. What's special is that the salon features a full team of Indigenous tattoo artists. The establishment was founded by Missy Mahan. It features a 50s aesthetic that is filled with Indigenous art on the walls. Mahan says the idea started for her after she noticed Indigenous representation in the area was lacking.
It came about just an idea that I had. I was tattooing out of a studio by myself and just kind of came to me to bring more of an Indigenous vibe to the shop because you don't see any of those around here in Phoenix.
Desert Bloom provides tattoos with an endless amount of options. They have even been approached by customers who want a traditional style.
Everything we do is custom, so if people do like more of the traditional style tattoos, we do that as well. And as far as traditional like tribal tattoos, those have, now that people know that we are an Indigenous owned shop, we get a lot of like actual, tribal tattoos, like a lot of the facial tattoos, from Southern Arizona.
The artists know that many of these markings carry specific meaning. Desert Bloom artist Mello explains what his tattoos from his kids mean.
One tattooed me last month, and my youngest tattooed me a couple months ago. So, yeah, they tattooed their names on me, and so those are my favorite tattoos, my kids.
All of these tattoo artists say in the long run they hope to inspire a new generation.
Absolutely. Even now, even on social media, I discover a new Indigenous artist like every day. So it's amazing to see more and more every day.
Phoenix, Arizona, Pacey Smith Garcia, ICT News.
Last week, Indigenous women from around Latin America met in Guatemala to highlight the discrimination they face. The third annual Abya Yala Indigenous Women's Summit saw hundreds of Native leaders and representatives from 11 countries. Around 500 Indigenous women addressed the current challenges they face in their communities. Some of the topics included the coordination of actions to combat violence, the impact of climate change, and the criminalization of resource defenders. One Indigenous leader from Panama talked about the importance of solidarity.
I'm learning how we can join together as countries. I was a bit mistaken in that and saw how important it is to form these alliances so each people can give their recommendations and be listened to.
Indigenous women from the summit also participated in a Guatemala City rally as part of the Indigenous Day of Resistance. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Secretary Jennifer Granholm leads the U.S. Department of Energy. This means she advises President Joe Biden on the nation's energy supply, carries out environmental cleanup, and oversees 17 national laboratories. She also oversees the federal government's trust responsibilities to tribes. I sat down with the secretary on Friday afternoon to ask her about her priorities for Native nations. Take a look. Secretary Granholm, thank you so much for joining the ICT Newscast.
So glad to be on. Thanks so much for having me.
So I want to start off with the Tribal Clean Energy Summit that was hosted in the first week of October. I understand that you hosted a roundtable with some tribal leaders. So tell us about that.
Yeah, actually, there were 60 tribal leaders who joined us here in Washington, D.C., about 350 participants, and then there was a virtual component. So there were almost 2,000 folks who joined by live stream. And the purpose of this, of course, we have had now a series of convenings, and it is really to have a nation-to-nation conversation about how we can partner with the tribes in their aspirations for moving to clean energy. And so a lot of these conversations are around what is the technical assistance that a tribe might need to be able to access some of the programs that have been signed into law under the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, because there is an awful lot in there that helps tribes.
You've been the Secretary of the Energy Department for almost 2 years now, but in your own words, I'd love to hear you assess the job that you and your agency have been doing in supporting tribal nations to move to a clean energy future, as you just said.
Yeah, I'm so honored that Wahala Johns, who heads our Office of Indian Energy, and her team, which is expanding, have done such a great job with reaching out to tribes so that we understand where they're coming from and we can have this conversation. We've released a whole series of financial awards to specific tribes for specific issues, and now we've got a lot of resources to be able to enhance that. So, for example, we want to be able to electrify all buildings within tribes if that is a priority. And of course, in many places that is. It's when you think about a lot of tribal communities that may be fossil fuel communities that may be powering our nation, and yet people go home and there's no power. So we want to make sure that tribal buildings and homes are powered. And so we've just released an opportunity for tribes to be able to access funding for that. A lot of tribes want to be able to do that, and we want to make sure it's easy to access and that we partner on technical assistance. And so we have beefed up our technical assistance ability to be able to work with tribes. And then part of the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, the president's agenda has been to expand the opportunity for tribes to access loans, very low interest loans, to be able to do bigger projects. And so we have expanded our ability to do that to the tune of expanded by about $18 billion. It's gone from 2 billion with a B to 18 billion to be able to provide loans to tribes who want to expand their clean energy ambitions.
I want to talk about, success stories that we're already seeing with tribal nations. I think so many tribal nations are located in places that have a lot of sun or a lot of wind. Can you maybe talk about success stories of tribes who are already making this push?
First one that comes to mind is Navajo Nation has a huge amount of land, and they have started down this path of solar. They have several megawatt systems of solar in their area, in the Four Corners area, and we want to make sure, and they have an ambition of really expanding that, and we want to be a partner. And that's a community too that historically has been an energy community in the fossil realm, and we want to be able to help see themselves powering their communities, their tribe, as well as giving power to the national electric grid with solar. That is really exciting for us, for them. And that's the kind of thing that we would like to see enhanced. There's other ways too. I mean, for example, we are looking at next generation technologies like clean hydrogen. And there are a lot of tribes that are very interested in partnering with states on developing applications for these clean hydrogen hubs. We think there'll be about 10 of them around the country to be able to produce this clean dispatchable baseload power. So there's all sorts of things happening. Wind is another area many tribes are interested in. Obviously, there are a lot of remote tribes, and we're really interested in helping them access energy, but also produce it for themselves. So for example, in Alaska, there are tribes that are using wave power to be able to, just in rivers, to be able to power a community that might have otherwise just relied upon diesel. So, tribes are so diverse. There's not one size fits all, but we're excited that all of these solutions are being made available.
I want to talk about the tribes that are smaller, who have less money, who might be located in more remote areas. For those tribes who are maybe just thinking about clean energy and what that looks like for them, what are the ways that your agency is helping them, and not just, the really wealthy tribes who have a lot of resources?
Right. No, exactly right. And this is one of the reasons why we've just put out this funding opportunity, this announcement, to be able to allow tribes that are remote and in rural areas access to clean energy systems. And sometimes, it's hard to access the federal bureaucracy. So making sure people are aware that if they go to energy.gov/Indian Energy, there's a technical assistance button that we want people to know is available to, because we want to hold hands for any community that wants to be able to access this funding that will allow more remote communities to electrify themselves using clean solutions. So whether it is wave power, tidal power, hydrokinetic power in Alaska, or it is, a community that's really focused on, for example, biofuels in another part of the country, whatever the kind of energy input that they have, we want to be able to allow them to use it for their own benefit. And for small communities, it's particularly important to have a partner to be able to make that happen.
I think your agency really hears a lot about jobs. And so if there was a Native leader, a Native educator, just a Native professional listening to this interview and wanted to think about career opportunities to make this push to a clean energy future, what would you say to them?
Oh my gosh, it is so ripe. I hope people consider moving into this area. It's all kinds of jobs for all kinds of people in all pockets of the country. We need people to build the solar panels, to install them. We need people to design solar farms, wind farms. We need people to build the wind turbines. We need people to be project engineers for these large projects. We need people to connect the projects to the grid. So we need linemen and electrical workers. We need we need lawyers. We need folks who can help communities get there, accountants, et cetera. There are all these jobs. It's whether it's in geothermal, which is another whole area that many tribes are interested in, hydroelectric power, nuclear power, solar, wind, you name it, biofuels, energy efficiency, weatherization assistance program, et cetera. all these jobs and making all these products are all things that are going to happen and have been unleashed as a result of the president's clean energy agenda, making the supply chains here in the United States. It is such a ripe area. This agenda alone is going to create 9 million jobs by 2030. It's a $23 trillion global market. So there's going to be a huge need to build these products in the United States. It is the best area to go into, if you ask me.
Well, I love the enthusiasm. Secretary, thank you so much for joining us, and please
bet.
come back again.
Okay, thanks for having me on.
In Canada, the term 60s scoop refers to the mass removal of Native children from their homes, community, and culture. An estimated 30,000 Native children were adopted or fostered to mostly white middle-class homes in Canada. In 2018, the Canadian government announced a financial compensation package for 60 scoop survivors. Colleen Rajat spoke to some of the survivors who said the compensation is not good enough.
Cameron Longo was taken from his birth mother in the late 1970s. He was adopted with his 2 younger biological sisters to a white middle-class home in Winnipeg. Longo says his adoptive white father, a former Christian missionary, severely abused him and his siblings for more than a decade.
Because I took jam from our pantry in the basement, strawberry jam, I love it. And Mom had canned it, and so when he found out, he made all of me and my 2 sisters get on our hands and knees, and he threw our dinner on the floor, and without using our hands, we had to eat it like animals. He said, if you're going to take stuff without asking like animals do, then he says you're going to be treated like animals. And there's, other terrible moments. He put feces on our face for taking Valentine heart candies.
On this day, he revisits the inner city neighborhood where he was taken away from his biological mother. Cameron grew up in Winnipeg, but thousands of other adoptees were sent to the United States and Europe. The 60s scoop covers a time period between 1951 to 1991. It's estimated 30,000 Indigenous children were taken away from their families, communities, and culture.
She was just a young woman. She had 5 kids by the time she was 24, and lived with a lot of domestic violence and probably some alcoholic addiction as well too. But she loved us. I've never ever doubted that.
Cameron never saw his mother again. She passed in 1987 at the age of 33. The settlement amounted to $875 million, $750 million for survivors, $50 million for a healing foundation, and $75 million for lawyers. The federal government made it clear that they were only compensating for loss of language and culture.
Oh, it's atrocious. $25,000 for loss of culture and language? It's terrible.
Cameron received the $25,000 settlement. He says that amounts to about $6 a day for everything he went through.
I still think that was very, very, very low amount. And when you think of the lawyers just getting so much money for, and they didn't suffer.
It's really nothing,
Christopher Gatehouse grew up in various abusive foster homes. He says no amount of money will ever compensate him for the abuses he suffered.
Everything that happened to me is still inside me, and it's never going to change. It's always going to feel that way. I'm always going to have this deep sadness inside me. This just feeling of just unwantedness,
For Longo, some healing has occurred. He says part of his healing process was his adoptive mother acknowledging that he was abused.
I didn't need to hear excuses saying I'm a battered wife, or I was just following the husband's orders, or that's the way we were raised, or this or that, but I needed to hear that.
In 1990, Cameron's adoptive father eventually served time in jail after being charged with the abuse. Gordon Blue Sky, a 60 Scoop survivor, is the newly elected chief of the Broken Head Ojibwe First Nation in Manitoba. Blue Sky was adopted to Pennsylvania and made it home decades ago.
I definitely feel that in my position now, I can bring voice to 60 Scoop and our survivors. I find it really disheartening that a settlement was happened on our cultural identity and it accumulated to $25,000. Again, it's not necessarily just about the money, but it's about our people not only feeling awkward in ceremony, awkward in their home community, maybe not being respected the same way as a member that was born here. So they don't understand how it is to feel that way. And I definitely say the Canadian government didn't recognize that in the settlement that we had.
Longo says he and other adoptees may be able to sue provincial agencies for physical and sexual abuse. For now, he remains hopeful that one day he will see true justice for what happened to him. In Winnipeg, Colleen Rajat, ICT News.
We are about to enter the busiest time of year for shopping, and experts say it's important to protect your identity and banking information. There are resources to help, and joining us today to give us some tips are Kelly Slaughter, who is the Identity Theft Program Manager with the Federal Trade Commission, and Christy Finsel, who is the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Native Assets Coalition. Welcome to the both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Christy, let's start with you. What are the red flags that made your organization decide to hold this identity theft webinar?
Yes, thank you. So the Oklahoma Native Assets Coalition is a Native-led nonprofit, and we serve in a national capacity. And in a variety of our programs, especially the free financial coaching that we provide nationally, we hear stories about identity theft. And so, as we're working with families to try to help build assets, we're also concerned about addressing asset stripping. And the asset stripping is clearly, some of this identity theft. So we decided to co-host with the FTC, or Federal Trade Commission, this webinar about identity theft. And it's going to occur this coming Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern time. And so we just want to try to get the word out about prevention, and then what to do if it happens in your family, and how to report it.
Kelly, let's go to you. Give us an idea of what's on this agenda.
Well, we have quite a few things that we're going to be covering, but the most important thing we want to enforce is that the most appropriate step and most important step that anyone can take to protect themselves from identity theft is to ensure that their sensitive information is secure, whether it's paper information online or stored in their computer or mobile device. We're going to give people information on how to make sure that information stays secure step by step for each one of those. Plus, we'll cover a couple of trends that are the most problematic in reports that we're seeing.
Christy, can you give us an example of some of the scams that Indigenous people have reported so far?
Yes, so in terms, to be quite frank, this is part of the reason we need this webinar. I think the Federal Trade Commission continues to grow its relationships in Indian country, and they asked for our assistance to try to get the word out. We hear, I think, and I don't do the direct coaching, I'm the executive director and managing other programs, but our coaches, hear about, I think, just general situations where maybe people give over a social security number, or something's hacked, or things that are also occurring in the wider population. But particularly, I think as broadband expands in Indian country and more people have access to that and to newer devices and are more online, it's just something to kind of think about. So as we're seeing that, we thought it's appropriate to try to get some of the word out. So I don't particularly have a list of everything that's been reported, and we are trying to actually connect Indian country better to the FTC so they can hear what these are and document them, and then be able to kind of know where the hot spots are.
Kelly, let's go back to you, because in my opening, I of course mentioned identity theft being something that people should be looking out for this holiday season. If that did happen to someone, how do they report identity theft?
Well, you want to go directly to identitytheft.gov. It is the FTC's one-stop shop for reporting and recovering from identity theft. At this particular site, people will be able to input what happened, how their information was compromised, and then receive a step-by-step guide on what to do to recover. We will provide all of the pre-printed letters that you might need, phone numbers to credit bureaus that you may need to report to, and most importantly, you'll get an identity theft report that allows you to be able to report to everyone that you had this breach of your identity. It gives you some additional information that you need in order to recover from identity and prevent it from happening further, such as credit freezes and fraud alerts as well. So that would be the first stop that you want to make in order to receive the guidance and the tools in order to recover and prevent it from happening again.
Well, Christy and Kelly, thank you so much for being here. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but we really appreciate all of these tips.
Thank you.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.